Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the Complex Games Apologist, and today I'm going to be showing you a window into my Roll20 doings. On the scene right here, you have a window into our Star Trek game. There's a couple of isometric maps, and there's some data on the starship. This is going to be an allied starship that's going to be in need of help, and so as you know from our Starship tutorial video, anytime somebody does something with a ship, they're often assisted by a ship, and so that's a die which is going to have a different target number. It can be a little bit of a headache to look that up, so getting those eyeballs right there on the screen is awesome. And this has also got a little bit of extra data on there. I just use these very rudimentary tokens with faces to talk about where people are. And I do have the back of them windowed so that they kind of sit and just feel a little bit more polished. Another thing that I will do is that when I get these maps, I go into my image editing program called the GIMP, and I snip off the stuff surrounding it so that I just have the floating part of the map. And this lets me sit it on my star field, and that gets things just that least bit more polished. And that way I can juxtapose different elements. So here's the bridge of the ship, and here is the main engineering of the ship, and here's some personalities that are going to be in the scene that, you know, we have some faces. We humanize them. Because, as you know, Star Trek Adventures, the combat isn't really super tactical. It doesn't have facing and stuff like that. So we have some freedom to go about making our tokens in different ways. And so what you see here is kind of how I do it. Now here's a couple of other tools that I have that I've gotten myself accustomed to, and I figured out a way to deploy them. The first are these decks. I have all the actions available for what happens in combat. And so this helps us learn when we do something that we're not familiar with, and it gets everyone's eyeballs on the scene for what's going on. So if somebody shoots a phaser, I can pull out this card from the deck, and this is basically just the rules for shooting a hand phaser. And so there's a little bit of stuff here on the side. If you take a minor action, you can adjust the setting on your phaser. And then I have the vocabulary of what those different settings will do. So that's some fun stuff that is available. Another thing that I do is I have these decks here for the tokens in 2die20 system for the momentum and doom. And this lets the players interact with these tokens, because if they were just other tokens, it would be hard for them to duplicate them and delete them. But when you have something set up as a deck, players can interact with them, and they can draw from the deck, and they can play them onto the surface. So that's a really fun thing that you can do. For threat, I have chunks of 2 threat. I think when I do Conan, I'm probably going to have chunks of 3 doom. I'll have to make some skulls for when I set up Conan in here. So let's move on to how I have things organized inside of Roll20. So you've already seen that I have these tokens which we use on the map, and we can also use to just humanize folks a little bit. Another example of what we have and that I work with is, let's see, why is this not pulling in here? Oh, well, there he is. So there's Dr. Tukjak, a Tellarite who looks a lot like Michael Chiklis. I have these portraits which can kind of pull in a little bit of ambiance, and I'll show you what I'm going to do with these portraits in another segment of this video to get even more information on screen, reminder text in a kind of a visually striking way that can be helpful. So that's one thing, is we have not only tokens, but we also have portraits. One of the things that I also like to do, let's go to a different scene here, is I like to set up and I believe that this map is from a DeviantArt called Seekim. She commissioned these maps, and they're pretty rad. And so I use a lot of this stuff, and I'm flying pretty close to the wind. This is all how I use this stuff personally, so I want to disclaim that. CBS owns Star Trek, and It's a lot of other people's work which is being put to use here, and so I want to credit all them and let you know that if anybody whose stuff has been used here wants to be specifically credited, or you want it taken down or any of that, let me know. I think this is just kind of a teaching tutorial, and it's kind of showing folks how I do this personally. So just to kind of provide some context here. So this is how I like to do ships. Rather than have a strict grid, I will have them on the star field. This particular map, of course, has a grid. And what you see here is this Klingon freighter, and there's our Oberst class. And that way I can kind of set them up like they're flying at each other. And I think that I may even have down here in my space stuff folder. Let me take a look at this. We need to go into images, and I think I might even have a photon. So, you know, you can really get the visuals cooking here. So we're flying by and we shot this photon at them. Pew! So there's a different way to do Roll20 is what I mean to say, as opposed to just kind of having minis and maps in this top-down grid. It can become more poetic, and it can become more of a theater of the mind canvas. And it can become a great way to help you learn a complex system. So what's going on with those decks? Here they are. When you want to create a new deck, you have them set up like this. And so you get all of your images into here. You go add card and you drag an image in here. And you set that up, and you can make a card back so that things look nice and neat. You can trim these as PNGs. You just select the stuff around the image you want to use and just delete that, and then export it as a PNG from GIMP. And we'll have a tutorial, very simple tutorial at the end of this video setting up how to do that. And so there's one example of that. I also have, I have a deck for power tokens. Because you can use those, and the players can handle and work with those because it's set up as a deck. And that's an older one, as I used to have people be able to pull out an image version of their character sheet to get it on the screen. I have not gotten that going for this particular game. And of course I have all the actions for ship-to-ship combat, which is super useful. So we can bring this deck online, and then from that deck we can pull in, okay, I want to scan for weakness. I'm at the sensor operator's position. Awesome. There you go. So one of the things is that it can get a little bit overwhelming with these. There's several different things that can be going on in Star Trek Adventures. And so one of the things that I have going on is I actually have a map of our bridge with the various positions that we can juxtapose. And so we can have characters at their consoles, and we can keep track of who's where like this, and that can help kind of provide a little bit more ambiance and a little more context for things going on with ship-to-ship combat. It's a lot of learning here for everyone, and so the more that everyone's eyeballs can be on the same thing so that we can be learning together, the more fun that can be. So, what are some other approaches? What are some other things that I've got going on here? So I showed you how I do the ship. So sometimes, you'll have a shuttlecraft, and this just provides easy access to the assist die from shuttlecraft. Another thing is that you can make tables. So right here, let's go to our window right there. There we just rolled on the starship damage table and we hit the weapons system. So to do something like that, you go into Roll20 and you can create tables. So you create a table like this one. And so here's the challenge dice that are part of Star Trek Adventures, the way that you roll damage and do lots of other things. So I just rolled 4 challenge dice with my macro. There, so I did 4 damage plus 3 effects. So I would have to know that vicious, if this weapon was vicious, it would do 3 more damage, so it becomes 7. But it does add up the results. So if you say 1 plus effect, it actually is counting that. That's kind of cool. So one other example of a table that I have available here is that starship damage table. So here it is. There's the thing, and you enter how many values on the table each of these counts for. So there's normally a 1 die 20 roll, and like some things are like 3 numbers on the 20, and some things are 4, and so on. And this kind of resolves things, and that way it's just ready to go. let's damage another system. We damaged weapons again. Wow, this ship is taking a beating. She's not going to be able to hit back. So another thing is that character sheets can be a little slow in Roll20 sometimes, and they do get people's eyeballs off in a different place. And so there's different kinds of preferences when it comes to that. Sometimes people want to use a paper character sheet, but it's great in a system like Star Trek Adventures to have everyone's eyeballs on the dice together for when you see complications, and so when you can start figuring that out. So if you prefer sort of a little bit more of a manual or analog version, I have these macros set up down here that let me roll 3 die 20. So, if I was looking for a target number of 12, I would have 3 successes here. And, why don't we... there. Oh, that's only 1 6. This could be 2 successes if I had a focus that applied, though, in Star Trek Adventures. So there's some examples of what's going on here. And to get macros going for a game like this, you just add a macro, and you have a particular boolean that you enter into Roll20. So let's roll 3 die 20, right? That's the macro and the button that's right there. But what? And that's kind of what the same thing that would happen if we did it manually, if we just entered it into the console like that. Simple as that. And I think you kind of got a little bit of a clue in about what's going on with how I've been using Roll20 in a different way. So when it comes to snipping, snipping images so that they don't have a background, so that they float freely, like say this nacelle right here, let's flip over into the GIMP and let's just get that started. So here, okay, so say here's this image of a corridor on a ship. So if I wanted to make this just kind of sit a little bit more pretty, what I could do like this is I'm going to select this ellipse. I'm going to select the inverse of that, so I'm selecting everything outside. I want to feather this right. See, now when I did it, I didn't have the feather checked. So let's just do it one more time. And let's invert that. And there you go. So now we have this cute little window. And if I wanted to polish that up a little bit more, I could just reduce the opacity of that, and I could create this right here. Now I use a plugin also that kind of lends a little bit more polish still to this. So I use this Outer Glow plugin that I have, and that I can get everything to sit against that star field. And so that helps a lot of different things eyeball-wise, besides just one grid map that everything snaps to. That isn't necessarily, the best way to go about things. And if you have lots of tokens rattling around, like in 2 die 20, that could be really problematic to have the tokens kind of snapping into different things. And I like to use the tokens this way because the players can touch them and they can work with them. And there's always an on-screen visual representation. But I haven't hitched my wagon ultra completely to something where there's no map, or where I have to have them sitting in a bin or something like that. So there you go. You can get reminder text. You can get kind of some really kind of rudimentary die rolls without too much work, and these decks. And so I will have a link in the Imgur to my Imgur albums where I keep all of these various play aids that you can use. Star Trek Adventures is a great game by Modifius, and Star Trek belongs to Paramount and CBS and all that. And some very amazing people out there have made most of the images that I have kind of repurposed here. So thanks to everyone, thanks to you, the viewer, and I hope this gives you a clue in about how I use Roll20 in a different way. Have a good one.